My name is Meredith Fisher, and at 33, I had designed data systems that processed 400 million transactions a day across 9 states. My brother called me the family failure. He said it at his own wedding, in front of 200 guests, standing next to the bride's multimillionaire father. My parents backed him up. My mother added her favorite line, the one she'd been polishing for years. And the man Liam was trying so hard to impress looked at me, went still, and said 5 words that cracked the evening wide open. What happened after that? What it cost Liam? What it cost my parents? What it finally gave me permission to stop caring? None of them saw coming. I barely did either. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. Quiet stories about ordinary women, impossible families, and the moment the truth finally stands up on its own. If you've ever been the one nobody bragged about, this one's for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to where it started. 6 weeks before the wedding, on a Tuesday night in March, I was sitting in my apartment in Charlotte eating leftover soup when my phone buzzed with a notification from a group chat I'd been removed from 3 weeks earlier. The Fisher fam chat. They'd added me back. Not to catch up. Not to apologize. The message from my brother read, "Are you coming or not? Don't make it weird." I hadn't been in the Fisher fam chat since early February. My mother created it 4 years ago, back when Liam launched his startup and suddenly needed a family audience for every milestone photo, every press mention, every round of applause he could manufacture from people who shared his last name. The chat had 312 unread messages when I was removed. I only noticed because the notification badge disappeared. Nobody told me. Nobody had to. I scrolled through Liam's message now. Below it, my mother had typed, "Meredith, please just confirm. Sienna's family is very particular about headcounts. Sienna Calloway, Liam's fiancée, daughter of Gerald Calloway, the venture capital investor whose fund had reportedly backed 14 companies in the last 3 years, all of them in data infrastructure." I knew the name because everyone in my industry did. Callaway Ventures was one of the firms that licensed infrastructure built on systems I had helped architect at Halcyon. I didn't think about that connection then. I was too busy reading the next message. From my father. Roger Fisher, a man who communicated almost exclusively through silence, had typed a single line. "It would mean a lot, Mer." That was the most my father had said to me in a text in 2 years. I put the phone down, picked up my soup. The broth had gone cold. Here is what you need to understand about the Fisher family. We had one success story, and it wasn't me. It was Liam. Liam, who dropped out of a business program to launch Viridia, a data intelligence startup that had raised $11 million and landed on 3 companies to watch lists before his 30th birthday. And me? I was the daughter who built things nobody in my family could see. The last time I went home for dinner was in January. My mother had invited the Pattersons from next door. Nice people, retired, the kind who ask polite questions and actually listen to the answers. Mrs. Patterson asked what I did for work. Before I could open my mouth, my mother waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. "Oh, Meredith does computer things, databases or something." She turned to Mrs. Patterson with a smile that had been rehearsed in front of a bathroom mirror. "We don't brag about her." She said it lightly, the way you'd say you don't keep dessert in the house. A fact of life. A household policy. Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. My father studied his pot roast. Liam, who had driven up from Raleigh for the weekend in a leased Audi, leaned back in his chair and grinned. The rest of the dinner was about Viridia. My mother recited Liam's accomplishments the way a docent walks you through a museum. The angel round, the partnerships, the office space in the research triangle. She left out the part where my parents had pulled $140,000 from their retirement savings to fund his Series A shortfall. I knew about it because my father had mentioned it once, in a phone call so quiet I thought the line had dropped. "We believe in him, Mer," he'd said. "Your mother and I. We put in what we had." $140,000, 31 years of a middle school principal's pension contributions and a dental hygienist's overtime pay, converted into equity in a company my brother ran and my mother narrated. I didn't argue. I never did. That was my problem. Not that I trusted them, but that I had stopped expecting anything from them a long time ago. At Halcyon Systems, I was a senior data systems architect. I had been there 6 years. The system I built, Cascade, was a real-time data orchestration engine that handled pipeline routing for enterprise clients across financial services, logistics, and healthcare. If you have ever swiped a debit card at a grocery store in the southeastern United States, there is a reasonable chance my architecture touched that transaction. Nobody at Halcyon called me a failure. My colleague Nora used to joke that I was the ghost who built the spine of this place. I designed the bones. Other people got to walk around in the body. That spring, Halcyon's CTO forwarded me an invitation to speak at a regional infrastructure summit in Atlanta. My name was listed on the program alongside 2 patents I'd co-authored and a keynote panel on scalable data pipeline architecture. I almost declined. I usually did. Not because I couldn't speak in public. I'd done it a dozen times. But because I had grown so used to being invisible that visibility felt like standing in the wrong lane of traffic. Professional isolation. That's what my therapist called it. She said I had organized my entire life around being competent and unseen, and that both of those things were costing me something I hadn't calculated yet. I told her I'd think about it. Then I went back to my desk and optimized a failover protocol that saved Halcyon's biggest client 6 hours of downtime during a system migration. Nobody sent me flowers. Nobody posted about it in a group chat. But when I pulled up the diagnostics the next morning and saw 0 failed transactions across 9 routing nodes, I felt the quiet satisfaction that only people who build things for a living understand. That was enough. Or I had decided it was. 2 weeks after the group chat reappeared, I drove to my parents' house in Gastonia. I told myself it was to drop off a set of replacement air filters my father had asked for. That was partly true. Mostly I went because something in my father's 6-word text had pulled at the part of me that still wanted to believe the word family meant something in that house. The living room hadn't changed. Same floral couch, same brass lamp. And on the mantel above the gas fireplace, a new addition, a glass trophy engraved with Rising Founder, Triad Business Journal, 2025. It sat between a framed photo of Liam shaking hands with an investor and a candle my mother had never lit. No photos of me on that mantel. Not one. Liam was in the kitchen when I arrived, eating a sandwich my mother had made for him. He was 30 years old and still ate sandwiches his mother cut diagonally. He looked up, grinned, and said it like a punchline he'd been saving. Every family needs one success and one cautionary tale, right, Mare? My mother laughed. My father looked at his hands. I set the air filters on the counter. Before I left, Liam caught me at the door. His grin was gone. He leaned close, voice low. "You're coming to the wedding. I need you there." I asked why. He shrugged, but his eyes didn't match the shrug. "Sienna's dad is old school, wants to see the whole family. Just show up. Be normal. Don't talk about work." Don't talk about work. The one thing I had that was entirely mine, and my brother's instruction was to leave it at the door like muddy shoes. 4 years earlier, Liam had called me at 11 at night. He was 26, 3 months into Viridia, and panicking. He had pitched investors on a proprietary real-time data engine, but he didn't have one. What he had was a pitch deck, a leased office, and a demo that ran on a spreadsheet macro. "I just need the core module," he said. "Something that works for the demo. I'll hire a real team after the round closes." He was my brother. My mother had called me twice that week to tell me Liam was under pressure. My father had sent a rare text. "He could use your help, Mer." So I helped. I spent 3 weeks building a functional prototype, a stripped-down data routing engine inspired by the design principles I used at Halcyon, but written from scratch on my personal laptop, on weekends and after midnight, entirely outside the scope of my employment agreement. I used my own methodology, my own naming conventions, my own logic patterns. I wrote clean, documented, modular code because that's the only kind I know how to write. We signed a consulting agreement. Liam promised a $10,000 fee and a co-architect credit on the technical documentation. He paid me $1,500. The credit never appeared. What did appear, 14 months later, was Viridia's public-facing product page describing their proprietary engine, a system I recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting. Same architecture, same module structure, same variable names in the API documentation. Liam had built Viridia on the bones I gave him. He renamed the modules, changed the color scheme on the dashboard, and called it innovation. I said nothing. My mother would have called me jealous. My father would have gone quiet. And Liam would have looked at me with that grin and said something about how family helps family. So I closed the tab, filed the consulting agreement in a blue folder, and went back to building things that worked. The blue folder lived in the bottom drawer of my desk at home, under a stack of old tax returns and a user manual for a router I no longer owned. It was a standard manila folder I had covered with blue packing tape 3 years ago because the original flap had torn and I didn't want the pages falling out. Inside, a printed copy of the consulting agreement with Liam's signature and mine, dated 4 years back. A PDF printout of the original commit log showing 47 commits over 21 days, all authored by M. Fisher. A 3-page architecture specification I had written in my own shorthand, with margin notes and a coffee ring near the bottom of page 2, and a single printed email from Liam, sent at 2 in the morning. Subject line: "Can you just make the demo work? I'll handle the rest." That email was the last honest thing my brother ever wrote to me about Viridia. I didn't keep the folder as evidence. I didn't keep it to build a case. I kept it because I keep records of my own work. Always have. Every system I've ever designed, every spec I've ever written, I archive it. It's the same instinct that makes me back up my files in 3 locations and label my cables. Some people keep journals. I keep documentation. That Tuesday in March, after reading Liam's message in the group chat and sitting with the cold soup and the quiet apartment, I opened the bottom drawer. I saw the blue folder. Ran my thumb across the tape. Then I closed the drawer. Whatever Liam was building or pretending to build, whatever my parents had poured their savings into, it wasn't my problem anymore. I had made my peace with being invisible. Or I thought I had. Nora told me not to go. We were eating lunch in the Halcyon break room. Turkey wraps, the ones from the place on Trade Street that put too much mustard on everything. And I told her about the wedding. She set down her wrap and looked at me the way she did when a junior engineer was about to push bad code to production. "Why would you go? They treat you like furniture." I couldn't argue with that, but something had shifted in me since January. Maybe it was the therapy. Maybe it was the summit invitation still sitting unanswered in my inbox. Maybe it was just the plain arithmetic of turning 33 and realizing I had spent a decade making myself smaller so the people around me wouldn't have to feel short. "I'm not going to perform small so everyone else feels tall," I told her. Nora raised her eyebrows. "That's a bumper sticker." "It's also true." I called my mother that afternoon and confirmed I'd attend. She sounded relieved. Not for me, but for the head count. "Good. Sienna's family is very organized. Don't bring anyone. Don't wear anything attention-getting. And maybe don't mention Halcyon. Liam gets sensitive when people compare." Compare. As if my career and his existed on the same axis. As if building real infrastructure and building a pitch deck were 2 versions of the same sport. I hung up and sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the blinking cursor on a config file I'd been editing. I almost didn't go. If you've ever talked yourself into shrinking just to keep the peace, you already know that feeling in your chest. Stay with me, because the moment I walked into that ballroom, everything I'd swallowed for years finally had somewhere to land. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how it turned. 3 weeks before the wedding, Viridia was everywhere. Liam landed a feature in a regional tech publication, The Quiet Disruptor: How One Founder Built a Data Engine That Could Change the Game. I read it on my phone during a code review. The article described Viridia's proprietary real-time data intelligence engine as a paradigm shift in pipeline orchestration. The technical description they quoted from Liam was almost word for word from the architecture spec I had written 4 years earlier. Not the spirit of it. The actual sentences. The article mentioned that Viridia was in advanced discussions with Callaway Ventures for a significant Series A round. Gerald Callaway's fund, the same Callaway whose portfolio companies already used Halcyon's Cascade infrastructure, the system I had designed. The irony wasn't lost on me. It just didn't feel like irony yet. It felt like watching someone wear your coat in a photograph and tell everyone they bought it in Milan. My mother posted the article link in the Fisher fam chat with a row of champagne emojis and the words, "Our boy." 12 family members reacted with hearts and thumbs up. I didn't react. I didn't have to. Nobody noticed either way. That same week, Liam appeared on a local podcast. I listened to 43 minutes of my brother describing technology he didn't build, solving problems he didn't understand, using terminology he had learned from the spec I wrote in my apartment while eating reheated pasta at 2 in the morning. He sounded confident. He sounded credible. He sounded like someone who had practiced his lines so many times he had started to believe them. And the worst part, the part that made my hands tighten around my coffee mug, was that his engine was real. I had made it real. I just wasn't part of the story anymore. My mother called on a Thursday evening. I was reviewing a load balancing configuration for Halcyon's Q2 migration. She didn't ask what I was doing. She never did. "Meredith, I need to talk to you about the wedding." Her voice had that particular tightness she reserved for conversations where she needed me to cooperate without asking questions. "Sienna's family is important. Gerald Callaway is, well, he's not like us. He's the kind of man who pays attention. So when you're there, I need you to be supportive." I told her I'd be polite. I don't mean polite, I mean, don't talk about technical things. Don't bring up Halcyon. Don't say anything that makes Liam feel like you're competing. She paused. "For once, just let your brother have his moment." For once, as if I had ever tried to take one. I wanted to ask her when, exactly, she thought I had ever competed with Liam for anything. I wanted to ask her why she had pulled $140,000 out of retirement to fund a company she couldn't describe in a single accurate sentence. I wanted to ask her what it cost her, every time she waved her hand and said she didn't brag about me. But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. My mother had grown up in a family where nobody made it. Her father drove a delivery truck. Her mother cleaned offices. Nobody went to college. Nobody built anything. Diane Fisher had spent her whole life terrified of being ordinary, and she had chosen Liam as her proof that she wasn't. If she admitted I was the one who built something real, she'd have to admit she'd been investing in the wrong person for 30 years. That was a debt she couldn't afford to acknowledge. So she covered it with the only currency she had: my silence. 10 days before the wedding, the Fisher fam chat lit up again. This time it wasn't logistics. It was Liam, typing fast, asking if I could take a quick look at some technical documentation before a meeting. He didn't say what meeting. He didn't say with whom. He said, "It's just a review. Like an hour max. Family favor." I recognized the pattern. It was the same cadence as 4 years ago. The same, just a quick thing, that turned into 3 weeks of building his company's spine. I scrolled up through the chat history they'd kept me out of. Planning messages, venue photos, seating charts I wasn't consulted on. And buried between a caterer's menu link and Sienna's note about floral arrangements, a message from Liam to my mother. "Don't worry, she won't understand what's happening anyway. She just builds back-end stuff." She just builds back-end stuff. The code that ran his entire company was back-end stuff. I typed a reply to his review request. "Send me the documents." He sent a 6-page technical summary of Viridia's infrastructure. The same summary, I assumed, that was going to Callaway Ventures. I read it in 14 minutes. He had gotten the architecture overview mostly right, because he was describing my work. But the scalability projections were fabricated. The throughput numbers were inflated by a factor of 3. And the section labeled "Proprietary Innovation" described a load distribution algorithm that I had published in a Halcyon white paper 2 years earlier. Liam hadn't just borrowed my code, he had built an entire narrative around it. A narrative where he was the genius and the engine was his invention. And now he needed me to proofread the lie before he handed it to his fiancé's father. I closed the document. I did not reply. The connection I should have made earlier arrived on a Monday morning during a routine stand-up meeting at Halcyon. Our VP of Client Relations mentioned that Callaway Ventures had recently renewed their enterprise license for Cascade. "They're one of our longest infrastructure clients," she said. Gerald Callaway apparently reviewed the architecture documentation himself when they first signed. He told our sales team it was some of the cleanest system design he'd seen in 20 years. She looked at me. "That was your work, Meredith." I nodded, took a sip of coffee, didn't say anything, but a small cold wire connected 2 points in my head that I had been keeping separate. Gerald Callaway knew Cascade. Gerald Callaway was about to invest in Viridia. Viridia's engine was Cascade's younger sister. Same bones, same logic, same handwriting. If Callaway's team ran any kind of serious technical due diligence on Viridia, they would find code patterns, naming conventions, and structural choices that matched Cascade's architecture at a foundational level. And if they looked at the authorship of those modules, they would find the name M. Fisher. My name. I sat with that knowledge the way you sit with a headache you're not ready to take medication for. Aware of it, uncomfortable, choosing not to act. It wasn't my job to police my brother's company. It wasn't my responsibility to call his investors and tell them the engine they were evaluating was built by someone who was never credited, never paid, and never mentioned in any of Viridia's filings. The truth was, sitting in my bottom drawer, inside a blue folder, waiting for nobody. If it mattered, it would surface through the right channels. If it didn't, I would go on building things that worked and letting other people take credit. I had done it before. 2 weeks before the wedding, the pressure from my family shifted from passive to active. Liam texted me directly, not the group chat, not through my mother, but a private message at 9 at night. "Be there by 4. Sit where they tell you. Don't be late and don't overdress. Sienna's family notices everything." I read the message twice. My brother was managing me like a variable in a system he didn't understand. I almost laughed. Then my father called. It was the second time he'd called me voluntarily in over a year. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was trying to say something important without actually saying it. "Meredith, your mother and we've got a lot riding on this. The wedding, the business, all of it." He paused. "I just need this to work out for him. We put everything in." Everything. He meant the $140,000. He meant the retirement account that now depended on Liam's startup being worth what Liam said it was worth. He meant the bet he and my mother had placed on their golden child. A bet they couldn't unwind without admitting they'd been wrong about everything for a decade. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not resentment. A dull, heavy sadness, like holding a box that was too full to close. My parents were scared. They were 60 and 62 years old, and they had traded their security for a company built on borrowed architecture and inflated numbers. They didn't know that. They couldn't know that. Because the only person who understood what Viridia actually was, what it was built on, where its code came from, what its real capabilities were, was the daughter they didn't brag about. The message arrived on a Wednesday morning. It came through LinkedIn, a connection request followed by a note from someone named Devin Pratt, senior technical analyst at Callaway Ventures. The note was professional, neutral, and specific. "Ms. Fisher, our firm is conducting a technical assessment of a portfolio candidate in the data infrastructure space. During our code review, we identified architectural patterns and module structures that closely align with published documentation attributed to your work on Cascade at Halcyon Systems. We would appreciate the opportunity to discuss provenance and authorship of certain foundational components. This is a standard part of our due diligence process. Could you make yourself available for a brief call this week?" I read it 3 times. My heart rate stayed steady. Years of reading diagnostics under pressure had given me that. But my hands moved before my thoughts caught up. I opened the bottom drawer, pulled out the blue folder, laid it flat on my desk and opened it for the first time in over a year. The consulting agreement. Liam's signature, slanted and hurried. My signature, neat. Dated 4 years ago. The commit log. 47 entries in 21 days, everyone authored by Meredith Fisher. The architecture spec, 3 pages, my handwriting in the margins, the coffee ring still dark near the bottom of page 2. And Liam's email. Can you just make the demo work? Everything was there. It had always been there. The folder wasn't a weapon. It was a record. The same kind of record I kept for every system I'd ever built. Timestamps, authorship, version history. The difference was that this particular record now sat at the exact intersection of my brother's ambition and his investor's due diligence. I hadn't put it there. The truth had just walked itself into the room. I closed the folder. I did not reply to Devin Pratt that day. I spent 2 days thinking about that LinkedIn message, not because the answer was complicated. The answer was simple. Yes, I wrote the code. Here are the records. The hard part was the math around it. If I confirmed authorship to Callaway's analyst, the due diligence report would flag Viridia's IP provenance as unresolved. An unresolved IP flag in a Series A round wasn't a speed bump, it was a wall. The investment would stall, maybe collapse. Liam's company, the one my parents had staked their retirement on, the one my mother recited like scripture, the one my brother had built his entire identity around, would face the kind of scrutiny that, fake it till you make it, doesn't survive. And everyone would blame me. My mother would say I did it out of jealousy. My father would go silent in a way that felt worse than shouting. Liam would tell anyone who listened that his sister sabotaged him because she couldn't handle his success. I sat at my desk for a long time, looking at the cursor on my screen. Then I opened a text editor and typed a sentence I didn't send to anyone. It was just for me. I will not lie about my own work. That was the whole of it. I wasn't going to call Callaway Ventures and volunteer a confession. I wasn't going to march into Liam's office with the blue folder and demand credit. But if someone from the investors team asked me a direct question about code I had written, I was going to tell the truth. I wasn't going to lie about my own work. Not for Liam. Not for my mother. Not for a family that had spent a decade pretending I didn't exist. I replied to Devin Pratt. I said I was available Thursday. The rehearsal dinner was held at a vineyard 40 minutes outside Charlotte. White tablecloths, string lights. Sienna had hired a calligrapher for the place cards. I found mine at a table near the kitchen door, wedged between a second cousin I'd met once and a college friend of Sienna's who spent the evening on her phone. Liam and Sienna sat at the head table with Gerald and Sienna's mother, Patricia. My parents sat one table over, close enough to orbit, far enough to earn. When introductions went around the room, Liam stood up and worked the crowd with the ease of someone who had practiced charm the way I practiced code review. Repetition, iteration, polish. He introduced his parents with warmth. He introduced Sienna's family with reverence. When he got to me, he paused. And this is my sister Meredith. She works with computers. A polite ripple of smiles. One man at a corner table, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, name tag I couldn't read from my seat. Tilted his head slightly when he heard my name. Not a reaction, exactly. More like recognition catching on a snag. The rehearsal dinner moved on. Toasts were given. Liam told a story about how Viridia almost didn't launch. But I coded through the night and made it happen. I ate my salmon. I did not correct him. After dinner, as guests drifted toward the parking lot, the man with wire-rimmed glasses passed my table. He stopped. Meredith Fisher? I nodded. I think I saw your name on a pipeline architecture panel in Atlanta. Scalable orchestration? I nodded again. He smiled, small, knowing, and walked away. I never got his name. But someone in that room had recognized mine, and for a reason that had nothing to do with Liam. On the drive home from the rehearsal, I put the pieces together. Not all at once. More like tiles clicking into a mosaic I'd been assembling without realizing I was building anything. Liam didn't invite me to the wedding because he wanted me there. He invited me because he needed Gerald Callaway to see a complete family. A normal family. A family that showed up, smiled, and didn't say anything inconvenient. But more than that, he needed me to be small. Visibly, publicly, undeniably small. Because if Meredith Fisher ever came up in conversation with Gerald Calloway's technical team, Liam needed the room's memory of me to be a quiet woman at a back table who worked with computers. A nobody. A family footnote. A cautionary tale. If I was already labeled, if everyone had already seen me dismissed and diminished and introduced as an afterthought, then anything I said later about Viridia's code would sound like bitterness, like jealousy, like a failure trying to drag down a success. That was the strategy. Not conscious, maybe. Liam wasn't a planner, but he had the instincts of someone who had survived by controlling the narrative, and the narrative required me in the room, wearing my assigned role like a name tag. What my brother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Gerald Calloway's team had already been in my inbox. The due diligence was already running. And the architect whose name was flagged in their technical review wasn't an anonymous contractor or a disgruntled ex-employee. She was sitting at table 9, eating salmon, being introduced as the family failure. The collision was coming. I hadn't arranged it. I hadn't planned it. I had simply stopped being willing to lie about what I'd built. And the truth, as it tends to do, was finding its own way to the surface. The wedding was held at Calloway Estate. 22 acres of rolling lawn, a stone manor house, and a reception hall with marble floors and ceilings high enough to make you feel like you'd been miniaturized. A string quartet played Debussy near the entrance. Champagne flutes stood at attention on silver trays carried by waitstaff in black vests. Everything about the setting announced money that had been around long enough to stop announcing itself. I arrived at 4, wearing a navy dress I'd bought 2 years ago for a conference I'd ended up skipping. Simple, clean lines, no jewelry except a watch my grandmother had given me. My mother would have preferred I'd worn something that faded further into the background. I chose the dress because it was mine, and I liked it, and I was done dressing for her comfort. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. Sienna looked luminous. Liam looked like a man who had rehearsed his tears. My parents sat in the second row, my mother in a lavender suit she'd bought for the occasion, my father in a tie that didn't quite match his shirt. They looked proud. They looked invested. In every sense of the word. I sat 4 rows back, between strangers, watching my brother promise to love and cherish a woman whose father ran the fund that was about to evaluate whether his company was real. I want you to picture it. Marble floors, a string quartet, and me, the one they told to keep quiet. I almost turned around at the door. If a part of you has ever stood at the edge of a room wondering if you belong, stay with me. What the bride's father said next changed which side of that room I stood on. Comment, truth, if you're rooting for her. The reception began at 6. Tables were arranged in concentric arcs around a dance floor. My seat was at the outer ring, table 11, near a side exit and a potted fern. Liam had assigned my placement personally. He told me this with a smile when he found me holding a glass of water near the bar. You're at 11. It's a great table. You can see the whole room. I could also be seen by nobody. He took my elbow, lightly, performatively, and began walking me through the crowd. This was his show. I was a prop. He introduced me to Sienna's aunt. This is my sister. She's in IT. He introduced me to a groomsman. Meredith. She's the quiet one. He introduced me to a couple I didn't recognize. Family's bookworm. Never leaves her desk. Each introduction was a small, precise cut, friendly enough to pass for humor, sharp enough to draw blood. My parents trailed behind us. My mother smiled and nodded. My father looked at his shoes. When Sienna's mother asked me what I did, my mother jumped in before I could answer. She's in tech support, I think. Something like that. I let it land. I let all of it land. But when Liam squeezed my arm and leaned in to whisper, "See? Nobody cares, Mir. Just relax." I pulled my arm free. Not dramatically. Not with a scene. Just enough that he felt the absence. You can introduce me, I said quietly. You don't get to script me. He blinked. Then the grin came back. The one that had been protecting him from accountability since childhood. Relax, sis. It's a party. He walked away. I stayed where I was, standing full height, drinking water, waiting. Gerald Calloway entered the reception at 6:30. He had been taking photographs with the wedding party, and his arrival shifted the energy in the room the way a current shifts the surface of a lake. Subtle. Total. He was taller than I'd expected. Gray at the temples. He wore his suit like it owed him nothing. His handshake when he greeted people was brief and direct. He didn't smile reflexively. He read the room before the room read him. Sienna kissed his cheek and brought him to a table where my parents were already seated, champagne in hand, performing their best version of a family with nothing to hide. Liam was magnetic in that moment, standing taller, speaking louder, telling a story about Viridia's latest partnership that I happened to know was still in the letter of intent stage. Gerald listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod along. He just watched Liam the way an engineer watches a system under load, looking for where the strain would show. I wasn't supposed to be nearby. My table was across the room, but the bar was between them and me, and I was still holding my glass of water when Liam spotted me. His eyes lit up, not with affection, but with utility. "Dad, come here. You haven't met my sister yet." He said it to Gerald, but it was aimed at me. He reached out and pulled me toward the circle the way you'd pull a suitcase off a carousel. Functional, graceless, purposeful. Gerald turned. My mother straightened in her chair. My father set down his champagne glass. And Liam, grinning so wide his molars caught the overhead light, positioned me in front of the man whose fund was about to make or break his entire company. Liam had one hand on my shoulder and the other holding a champagne flute. He turned to Gerald with the grin, the one that was half charm and half armor, and said it clearly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "This is our family failure." He laughed, the kind of laugh designed to give other people permission to laugh too. A few guests obliged. My mother, seated 3 feet away, tipped her glass slightly and added her signature line, the one she had tested at dinner tables and church functions and neighborhood barbecues, until it had the smooth delivery of a campaign slogan. "We don't brag about her." She said it to Gerald's wife Patricia, who smiled politely. She said it the way she always said it. As a kindness, as modesty, as a mother who simply had one child worth discussing and one she kept in the margins. My father looked at his plate. Liam squeezed my shoulder. I stood still. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I didn't perform the role I'd been assigned, the good-natured sister who absorbs the joke, who plays along, who makes the golden child shine brighter by standing in his shadow. I stood with my back straight and my hands at my sides, and my face absolutely neutral. 33 years of being the punchline, and I was finished laughing on cue. Gerald Calloway had not spoken. He had watched Liam deliver the line. He had watched my mother add hers. And now he turned. Slowly. The way someone turns when they're recalculating everything they thought they knew about the room they're standing in, and looked directly at me. Not at Liam. Not at my parents. At me. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Not with a gasp or a double take. His brow drew together. His lips pressed thin. He went completely still. Gerald Calloway spoke quietly. The string quartet had paused between movements, and his voice carried further than he probably intended. Or maybe exactly as far as he intended. "So it's you. This is unexpected." 2 sentences. That's all it took to tilt the room. Liam's grin froze. My mother set down her champagne glass. Patricia Calloway looked at her husband with an expression that said she had seen this particular stillness before, and knew what it preceded. "I'm sorry?" Liam said. He was still smiling, but the smile had detached from the rest of his face. "Do you two know each other?" Gerald didn't look at Liam. He was still looking at me. "Monsieur Fisher," he said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Cascade, Halcyon Systems." I nodded. "Yes. Your architecture runs in 11 of my portfolio companies." 12, I said. MedSync migrated to Cascade in January. Gerald's jaw tightened. Not with anger, but with something closer to the expression of a man who has just realized the math he's been running has a variable he missed. Devon's report flagged the provenance issue last week, he said, almost to himself. I assumed the M. Fisher in the authorship records was a former contractor. Or a coincidence. He looked at Liam, then back at me. You're his sister? Yes. And you built the foundational modules that Viridia's engine is based on. I didn't hesitate. I didn't soften it. I didn't dress it up or qualify it or add caveats to protect anyone's feelings. I wrote the original architecture. The consulting agreement is dated 4 years ago. The commit history is mine. The room had gotten very quiet. Not silent. There was still the clink of glasses somewhere. Still the murmur of guests who hadn't noticed. But the circle around us, Liam, my parents, Patricia, Gerald and me, had become its own atmosphere. Liam moved first. He stepped between me and Gerald, his body language shifting from charming host to cornered animal in the space of a breath. Okay, hold on. She's exaggerating. She helped with an early prototype. That's it. Everything Viridia is today. The engine, the product, the platform. That's my team. My vision. She wrote a few lines of code 4 years ago. He looked at Gerald with a version of the grin that had stopped working. You know how it is. Family members always think they contributed more than they did. Gerald tilted his head. The module architecture in your engine matches Cascade's published design patterns at a structural level. Devon's report identified naming conventions, dependency trees, and routing logic that are functionally identical. He paused. Can you explain the load distribution algorithm in your core pipeline? Liam blinked. The technical team handles the specifics. I'm the CEO. I focus on strategy and the algorithm, Gerald said. Not unkind, just precise. It's a weighted round robin with adaptive latency thresholds. Your documentation says it's proprietary. Can you describe how it works? Liam opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked at me, not with hatred, not yet, but with the panicked recognition of a man who has run out of runway and can see the trees. My mother stood up from her chair. Gerald, this is a wedding. This isn't the time for Diane, my father said quietly. It was the first word he'd spoken in 20 minutes. She stopped. Gerald looked at me again. Ms. Fisher, I'm going to ask you something directly. I met his eyes. Go ahead. Is the core engine of Viridia your original work? Yes. I said it the way I would answer a technical question in a code review, clearly, specifically, without emotion. The core engine of Viridia is based on a data routing prototype I built over 3 weeks 4 years ago. The architecture follows a design spec I wrote myself. The commit history is entirely mine. I signed a consulting agreement with my brother, which he did not honor. No payment in full, no co-architect credit. The codebase was never formally assigned to Viridia. I built it on my own time, on my own equipment, outside the scope of my Halcyon employment agreement, and the IP was never transferred. I wasn't performing. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't tearful or triumphant or shaking with vindication. I was answering a direct question with documented facts. That was the only weapon I'd ever needed. Liam's face went red. You're doing this here? At my wedding? You asked me to come? I came. You introduced me to your investor. He asked me a question. I answered it. You planned this. I didn't plan anything. I don't lie about my own work. Not for anyone. Liam turned to Gerald. She's bitter. Look, this is a family issue. Whatever she thinks The IP was never assigned, Gerald said, cutting him off with the gentle finality of a man who had spent 30 years reading contracts. If the core architecture isn't owned by the company, the investment can't proceed. This isn't personal. It's due diligence. My mother's face had gone the color of chalk. My father was looking at me, not with anger, but with something that might have been the first stage of understanding. The room felt smaller. The quartet had started again. Pachelbel, of all things, and the melody floated over the silence between us like a hand reaching across a table nobody was sitting at. What happened next didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers, the way a building settles before it fails. Cracks first, then creaks. Then the slow, irreversible shifting of weight that was never distributed correctly. Gerald stepped back from Liam. Not physically. He was already standing apart. But his posture changed. His shoulders squared. His hands clasped behind his back. It was the posture of a man who had made a decision and was now simply executing it. "Liam, I want to be clear," Gerald said. His voice was low, measured, without heat. "Our firm's investment in Viridia was contingent on clean IP ownership. The preliminary flag in Devon's report was serious enough that I raised it with your team last Tuesday. Your CTO told me the architecture was developed in-house. That is demonstrably not the case." Liam shook his head violently. "She's lying. She's doing this because she's jealous of everything I've—" "She's not lying." Gerald said it without raising his voice. "I've used her architecture. I've read her documentation. I know what her systems look like from the inside. Your engine is her work." That sentence landed on the room like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples went outward. Guests at the nearest tables had stopped talking. Sienna, who had been dancing with a cousin, noticed the silence and started walking toward us. My mother stood frozen, one hand on the back of her chair, her mouth slightly open. A woman watching the investment she had made in her own story collapse in real time. My father was staring at the floor. His hands were shaking. And Liam, who had charmed investors and reporters and boardrooms, Liam, who had built a career on the foundation I'd poured and the narrative he'd constructed on top of it. Liam was unraveling. Liam turned on me. His face was the color of raw brick, and his voice had climbed into a register I hadn't heard since we were children, and he'd broken something he couldn't blame on the dog. "You did this on purpose. You came here to ruin this for me." I didn't respond. "You couldn't stand it. You never could. You sit in your little cubicle building your little systems and you can't handle that I'm the one who actually made something of himself." "Liam." Gerald's voice was a flat wall. Liam spun toward the display table near the entrance, the one arranged with photos of him and Sienna, a guest book, a champagne tower, and the glass trophy. "The Rising Founder Award from the Triad Business Journal, 2025. The one that had lived on my parents' mantle, transported to the venue like a sacred relic." Liam grabbed it. I don't think he meant to throw it. I think he meant to hold it up as proof. Proof that he was real. That what he'd built was real. That the engraving on the glass meant more than a commit log in a blue folder. But his hands were shaking and the glass was heavier than rage, and it slipped. It hit the marble floor and shattered. The sound cut through the reception like a gunshot. Crystal fragments slid across the floor in every direction. Sienna stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the dance floor, her dress pooled around her feet, staring at the man she was supposed to have married that afternoon. And the look on her face wasn't anger. It was recalibration. The same expression I'd seen on Gerald's face minutes before. The expression of someone running the numbers again and arriving at a different total. Nobody moved. Pachelbel kept playing. And among the broken glass on the marble floor, the word founder was still readable on one of the larger fragments. My mother broke first. Not with tears. With strategy. She crossed the floor toward Gerald, heels clicking on the marble, champagne-stained napkins still clutched in her left hand, and did what she had always done. She tried to renegotiate reality. "Gerald, please. This is a family matter. Meredith has always had issues. She's jealous. She's competitive. She doesn't understand business." "Mrs. Fisher." Gerald's voice was not unkind. "Your daughter's architecture is licensed by my fund. Her published work is referenced in 3 industry white papers. The system she designed handles more daily transactions than any product in my current portfolio." He paused. "I don't know what she is in your family, but in my industry, she's one of the most respected infrastructure architects in the Southeast." My mother's mouth opened, closed. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for one fraction of a second I saw something behind the performance. Fear. The pure, uncut terror of a woman who has spent 30 years constructing a story about who her children are and has just heard a stranger dismantle it with facts she can't argue with. Then it was gone. Her face hardened. Well, if she's so successful, why didn't she ever say something? Why didn't she help her brother properly? There it was. Even now. Even with the glass on the floor and the investor pulling away and the entire narrative in pieces around her feet. My mother found a way to make it my fault. I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. The blue folder existed. The commit log existed. The consulting agreement existed. I hadn't needed to bring any of them to the wedding, because the truth had done its own audit. Gerald's team had asked the right questions. I had answered honestly. That was all. The money came up the way money always does in families that have staked everything on a single bet. Not in a boardroom, but in a hallway, between courses, in voices too loud for the setting and too quiet for the magnitude of what had been lost. My father pulled me aside near the coat room. His tie was loosened, his eyes were wet. The retirement, Mer. We put in 140,000. Your mother and I. We believed him. I nodded. I know. Is it gone? I don't know, Dad. That depends on what Viridia has left without the Callaway round. He leaned against the wall. He looked old. Older than 62. Older than a man should look at his son's wedding. And for a moment, I felt the weight of something I hadn't expected. Grief. Not for what Liam had done to me, for what my parents had done to themselves. My mother appeared at the end of the hallway. She walked toward us with the particular urgency of a woman who has just lost control of a situation and is looking for someone to contain. Meredith, you need to fix this. I didn't break it, Mom. You didn't have to come here and... You told me to come. Liam told me to come. You added me back to the group chat so I could confirm my attendance at an event where my job was to stand still and be small. Her eyes flickered. Something beneath the armor. Just for a heartbeat. I just wanted one thing to be proud of, she said. Her voice cracked. It was the most honest sentence she had ever spoken to me. Then she straightened her shoulders, blinked twice and said, You should have stayed quiet. You owed us that. The moment was gone. The wall was back up. I turned and walked toward the exit. Gerald found me near the front entrance. I was standing under the portico, my car keys in my hand, the cool evening air pulling at the hem of my dress. The estate grounds were lit with landscape lighting that turned the trees into something out of a painting, beautiful, staged, and entirely for someone else's benefit. Ms. Fisher. I turned. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. Behind him, through the glass doors, I could see the reception continuing. Diminished, confused, but continuing. Sienna was sitting at a table with her mother. Liam was nowhere visible. I want to be straightforward with you, Gerald said. The investment in Viridia is not proceeding. That decision was made before tonight, based on the technical review. What happened in there didn't change the outcome. It just accelerated the timeline. I nodded. I also want to say that I owe you an apology. Not for the due diligence. That's process. But for not connecting the name on the report to the person in the room sooner. I should have reached out to you directly before tonight. You didn't know I was his sister? No, but I should have made the connection. Devon's report was thorough. The authorship was clear. He paused. For what it's worth, your work speaks for itself. It always has. I didn't need Gerald Callaway's validation. I had built Cascade without it. I had built a career without it. I had stood in that ballroom and answered his question without needing anyone's permission or approval. But hearing it, hearing a man who read balance sheets the way I read system logs, acknowledge the architecture of what I had built, that wasn't nothing. Thank you, I said. He nodded. I walked to my car. I came when I was told to. I was leaving because I chose to. The fallout arrived the way data arrives, in packets, at intervals, each one adding resolution to a picture that was already clear to anyone paying attention. Callaway Ventures formally withdrew from Viridia's Series A within 72 hours. The stated reason was neutral, unresolved IP provenance. But in the industry, neutral language is its own kind of verdict. 2 other investors who had been circling pulled back within a week. The regional tech publication that had profiled Liam as the quiet disruptor ran a follow-up that was significantly less flattering. Viridia didn't collapse overnight. These things rarely do. But the scaffolding was gone, and what remained was a company without clean ownership of its core technology, without its lead investor, and without the narrative that had been holding it together. The wedding was postponed. Sienna moved back into her parents' estate. I don't know whether she and Liam spoke after that night. That wasn't my business to track. In the Fisher fam chat, the one I'd been removed from, added back to, and never once genuinely included in, my parents sent me a message for the first time that had nothing to do with Liam. My father wrote, "Are you doing all right, Mare?" My mother wrote nothing for 3 days. Then, "You could have told us." I replied once. I'm open to talking when the conversation starts with respect. Not before. Nobody responded. That was fine. I wasn't waiting for an answer. I was setting a boundary. The kind I should have set a decade earlier. The kind you can only set once you've stopped believing you deserve the silence people have been giving you. I went back to Halcyon the following Monday. Cascade was still running. 400 million transactions a day, 9 states, 0 fanfare. Nora brought me a coffee and didn't ask about the wedding. She just sat next to me at my desk and said, "You look like someone who finally exhaled." I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in a week. The summit invitation was still in my inbox. The one in Atlanta. The panel on scalable orchestration architecture. I accepted it that afternoon. Not because Gerald Calloway's words had given me permission. Not because Liam's collapse had made me brave. Because I had spent 10 years building systems that held the weight of industries, and I had done it while my family called me a failure to my face, and I was finished letting their vocabulary define mine. The failure was never me. The failure was a family that measured worth by volume, by who talked the loudest, who raised the most money, who could fill a room with the sound of their own mythology. I had filled rooms with infrastructure, with reliability, with the kind of quiet, invisible work that people only notice when it breaks. And mine never broke. Your worth was never something they had to brag about for it to be real. It was always doing its quiet work, steady as a pulse, with or without their applause. That's my story. A blue folder I almost threw away. A room that told me to stay small. And a truth that stood up on its own when I finally stopped holding it down. If you've ever been the one nobody bragged about, let this be your sign. Stop shrinking. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.